In the final weeks of World War II, German soldiers were making a choice that had nothing to do with military orders. On the Western Front, 59,000 German soldiers were surrendering to Americans every single day. On the Eastern Front, those same German soldiers were dying in the thousands rather than put their hands up. Same war, same uniform, two completely opposite decisions. The reason is not strategy. It is not cowardice. It is guilt, and the cold calculation of what that guilt was going to cost them. What you're about to hear is the part of World War II that most history classes skip entirely. Stay with me. Here is the question nobody asks. If Germany was already finished, why were tens of thousands of soldiers still dying on one front, while the other front was basically a peaceful surrender line? The answer is not that Western Germans were smarter, or braver, or better soldiers. The answer is that the men on the Eastern Front knew exactly what was waiting for them, and they made a desperate, calculated bet that dying fighting was better than what came next. To understand why, you have to go back 4 years, to what Germany did first. When Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in 1941, he was not fighting a normal war. He called it a Vernichtungskrieg, a war of annihilation, and his armies delivered exactly that. Of roughly 5.7 million Soviet soldiers captured by Germany, 3.3 million of them never came home. They starved, they froze, they were shot. That is a death rate of nearly 60%. Now compare that to British and American prisoners held by Germany, where the death rate was around 3 to 4%. Let that gap sink in for a moment. German guards did not treat all prisoners the same. The Soviets were not just enemies. They were targets for deliberate extermination. And Soviet soldiers were not learning this from newspapers. They were seeing it with their own eyes. Liberated camps, mass graves, skeletal survivors who told them exactly what German captivity meant. By 1945, the Red Army advancing into Germany carried 4 years of buried rage. The German soldier on the Eastern Front in 1945 knew two things with absolute certainty. 1, what his army had done. 2, what was coming for him because of it. So was this just panicking soldiers, or was there a plan behind it? There was a plan, and it came from the very top. After Hitler's suicide, his chosen successor, Grand Admiral Dönitz, had one single obsession in those final days. Get as many German soldiers west as possible. Surrender them to the British and Americans. Save them from the Soviets. From May 2nd, 1945, Dönitz authorized a deliberate policy of partial surrenders in the West, buying time, giving ground to the Americans, while keeping Eastern units fighting just long enough to flee. But here is what makes this extraordinary. Dönitz later admitted that he could not even issue an order to surrender to the Soviets, because he wasn't sure his own troops would obey it. Think about what that means. The supreme commander of Germany's military knew his soldiers would rather die than follow that order. And on the other side of the table, Eisenhower knew exactly what was happening. When German General Jodl arrived to negotiate the final surrender, Eisenhower gave him a cold ultimatum. Germany surrenders on all fronts, east and west, unconditionally and right now. Or Eisenhower closes the Western lines. German soldiers fleeing east will be turned back, straight into the Red Army. That threat worked. The documents were signed, but for the men already trapped in the east, in pockets like Halbe, there was no time to wait for signatures. They were already running. You are 22 years old. You have not slept in 4 days. You have not eaten in 2. Half the men you arrived with are already dead in this forest. Behind you, Berlin is on fire. There is nothing left to defend. To your east, the Red Army. Millions of soldiers who have seen what your army did to their country, who have walked through the liberated camps, who have buried their brothers in mass graves that your officers ordered. To your west, if you can break through the Soviet encirclement, American lines. A POW camp, yes, but food, medical care, a real chance to see your family again. In the forests of Halbe, German soldiers, SS units, and thousands of civilians, mothers with children, old men, the sick, are all trying to punch through the same Soviet ring. Artillery turns the forest paths into killing grounds. Horses collapse in the mud. Vehicles burn on the narrow tracks. People throw themselves flat as shells detonate in the canopy above them. Some make it through. Up to 25,000 German troops and several thousand civilians eventually reach the Elbe River and surrender to the Americans. But around Halbe itself, roughly 30,000 German soldiers die in those final days. And even after Germany's official surrender on May 8th, some units in the East kept fighting for weeks. Not because they believed Germany could win, but because stopping meant falling into the hands of the wrong army. Here is the hardest truth in this story. The German soldiers' terror of Soviet captivity was not paranoia. Hundreds of thousands of German POWs died in Soviet camps, some not released until the early 1950s, nearly a decade after the war ended. But that terror was also not innocent. It was built entirely on what Germany had done first, a war of deliberate annihilation. Nearly 60% of Soviet POWs dead, 26 million Soviet soldiers and civilians killed, entire regions of the USSR destroyed. The machine of destruction that Germany unleashed in the East created the very vengeance its soldiers were now running from. The German soldier who went home in 1948, fed, processed, and released by the Americans, and the German soldier who died anonymously in a Siberian labor camp in 1953 were not separated by luck alone. They were separated by which direction they were able to run. History is rarely a clean story of heroes and villains. It is a story of consequences. And the Eastern Front of World War II is perhaps the most devastating proof in recorded history of what happens when a nation decides that certain lives simply do not matter. If this hit differently than what you expected, share it. These are the histories that get buried. Don't let them stay buried.